Hey, hello, and welcome or welcome back. It is the first wrap up of March. We seem to be moving through this year really damn quickly. So, basically, I know I said I think it was in my six of the best wrap up that March was going to be exclusively fiction written by women. Well, not fiction written by women necessarily. I might find some non fiction and throw that in there. But as this is the first wrap up of March, this is all books that I've read throughout February. So that's why this one, there's a little contingent of not women. So first up, I want to briefly touch on the fact that I was meant to be reviewing Earthlings this week, but I just couldn't find my rhythm with it. I wasn't getting into it, but I think that's just me. Where my brain's been right now, I've been enjoying a lot more like visual fiction in terms of things like you can clearly see by what I'm reading at the minute. It's a lot more comics, manga, graphic novels, that sort of thing. So I will definitely come back to that in the future. I have found that there is the audiobook version on BorrowBox, so I'll probably give that a go at some point. Might be something I'm a bit more into in that form. Who knows? I definitely want to come back to it because it's like from the little that I did read, I was enjoying it. I just couldn't find a rhythm with it. I wasn't finding myself going back to it. So this is just my brain being my brain. This is definitely not that book. Almost guaranteed. Just wanted to touch upon that first. So, on to the actual reviews. First up, we have An Unkindness of Ravens. We've got a few authors there, so I'll just pop them on here. I think we got 2 or 3 authors on this one. This is like this is just the campy kind of fun I love to go for with comics and graphic novels and stuff. It's, to me, it reminds me a little bit of the Netflix version of Sabrina. Is that The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina? And also that kind of Hex Girls thing and what's it called? The Craft. Basically, what I'm saying is the Woolawa are gonna love this one. Like, as simple as it is. It is for, like, well, I'm saying it's for them. Who knows about that? But I think this is going to be up their alley kind of thing, right? I just thought it was so much fun. I mean, this week probably wasn't my favourite, but any other week it easily could have. I was on such a roll there. It wasn't my favourite book this week, but any other week it easily could have been, because I still had a lot of fun with it, and if I find more volumes of it, I will be sure to pick them up. So, yeah, this is like campy teen, like gothy kind of vampy kind of deal with witchy stuff and magic stuff. All kinds of fun. Definitely if you're into that sort of thing, like any of the pieces of media that I mentioned previously with things like Chilling Adventures of Sabrina and The Craft, definitely give this a little look-see. I think you'll really enjoy it. Next up, we have Homesick Pilots. This was absolutely incredible. I bloody loved it. I couldn't put this down. I was meant to be reading it sort of in between doing other bits of work when I was doing some stuff at the library, but I picked it up. I was meant to read like maybe a chapter. Well, obviously you read every book a chapter at a time, but I was meant to, read a chapter, put it down, come back to it. I picked it up, read a chapter, and I went to put a bookmark in to put it aside. And I just I just picked it back up off the side of the table and then just plowed through the rest of it. I knew that I was finishing it in one session as soon as I got to the end of that first chapter. I was hooked. Like, there's this air of 90s nostalgia to it. I mean, I'm not old enough to have 90s nostalgia, but I mean in that way that, like, obviously Stranger Things has 80s nostalgia to it, and this has that for the 90s. And it's nice that it's in a way that it doesn't feel like it's being shoved down your throat, because I think sometimes people get a bit carried away. It's not like overabundance of references and that kind of thing. There's just a general nice energy and vibe to it that makes it have that nice nostalgic feel to it. And I think as much as anything with this book, it was the illustration, specifically like the character design, was just what really roped me in. There were two in particular that I was just really engrossed by. One of them was this horseshoe figure that was just divine, honestly, and the other was like, it was kind of had a big VHS tape head, and then the sort of body made of the tape and stuff, and it looked so good, and the colours of everything, that like, people call it like the bi lighting kind of thing, where it's like blues and pinks and purples, and it's all just, it's all lit so well, and it just makes my little artsy heart sing a little bit, and I just thought that was wonderful. I think of the comic volumes that I've read so far, this might be one of my favourites, very closely tied to One Punch Man. And I say comic volumes because I wouldn't necessarily associate it with something like, I wouldn't necessarily call Junji Ito something like comic volumes, because that is more graphic novel manga rather than comic volumes. And also, yes, I would still say One Punch Man is a comic volume. I'm sure somebody is going to get annoyed with me for that, because, look, I'm sure, other than the sort of direction in which you read it and original language, there is an actual difference between comics and like manga volumes. And I am using that in terms of things like One Punch Man, which started out as a webcomic, and then I don't know if it was published in full volumes as the manga, or if it was then published like in individual parts, but I think it was just published in the volumes. But either way, if somebody could explain to me the difference between like a volume of comics like that, because it is at the end of the day a volume of like remastered web comics. I think remastered is probably the best version of that, because I already talked about the way that the art's been changed. But, you know, you've got the remastered webcomic volume, and then the volume of comics as they would have been, a series has been brought together from individuals through to the final thing. If you could explain to me the difference, other than, like I said, the direction in which you read it, and maybe even original language and that kind of thing, if you could explain to me the difference, while remaining polite, please, I would be very much appreciative of that. I don't want to be patronised, and I don't want to be laughed at, because I genuinely don't know if there is a complete difference. And if there is, wonderful, do let me know, and I will be more careful with how I differentiate the two. And if not, let me be. Next up is what you might be expecting if you've read the title. So first up we have Tomi by Junji Ito, and of the three, because we've got one more coming up next, of the three that I've read, this is probably A, my favourite, and B, the least terrifying, which probably says a lot about me. I mean, I think as much as anything is that I found myself being really drawn in by the character of Tomi, which is, you know, kind of the point, but it was in this way that left me really, really uncomfortable. Again, probably the point, but I found this one fascinating in a way that I didn't necessarily with, especially not the Frankenstein collection, but I found this one very, I don't want to say easy to read, because it wasn't easy to read, but it was the least difficult to read. I think is better than easiest, because it wasn't. There were still some moments that made my skin crawl, because, you know, there's the usual points of body horror that like get into your skin and just make you go eh. But there are a lot of moments that brought out this particular kind of you know, when you shouldn't laugh and you do, or like because you're uncomfortable, you know, like maybe you're at a particular event or something like that where everything's either meant to be somber or fearful, or like the mood is not meant to be light, and yet you can't help but laugh. That's how I felt throughout this book, and I found that really fascinating. You know, it's just one of those things, isn't it? I do think it's funny that the one book that was the least horrifying throughout was my favourite one. But I am an abject coward, so I think if you're looking to get into reading Junji Ito, but you don't want to like be thrown into the deep end, you know, and you don't really know where to start, I think this is the good place to start. Because it's still got all of the aspects that you want and expect from reading an Ito book, but you're not going to fully yourself, you know? You're not being thrown into the deep end here. Speaking of the deep end, next up we have Uzumaki by Junji Ito. This is the one book of his that I knew about before having spiraled down this rabbit hole, and B, the book that was recommended to me by like my friends who knew I was wanting to pick up more after I'd read Frankenstein. And I just want to say to every friend who's ever recommended this, both before having read Frankenstein and since, why do you hate me? Because don't get me wrong, right? I really enjoyed this book. It was as good as everybody says it is. There is a reason that this one is the Junji Ito book. And I am so glad that I didn't read this first, because I think if I did, I wouldn't have read any more. It's as simple as that. This was the only one of the three where I didn't... No, let me try that again. This was the only one of the three where I had to take regular breaks. And the thing is, it's not that I didn't have to take regular breaks with the others, but that was usually just because I had other things to do, or I can't read like 200, 300 pages in one go. But with this one, I had to take regular breaks because I was feeling so uneasy, so uncomfortable. I was just like, I can't do this. I'm gonna be sick. Like, I genuinely was really sick reading this, and I was just like, because it scratched something in the back of my head that I didn't like. It was just like this feeling at the bottom of my skull that just like, because it's a strange type of discomfort with this book, because yes, all of the visual aspects are horrifying to look at, but I don't know that most of it is more horrifying than what I'd already read. I think as much as anything else, this is one of those where it's the psychological aspect that really gets in there and just so appalling. Like, often while reading this, I was just sat there going, why am I still reading this? Why am I going to read more of this? Why do I keep reading this goddamn book? And yet I did keep reading it. And also, I'm probably going to read more of his books in the future. Like, 1, if I find more in the library, I'm definitely going to pick them up. 2, if I'm able to find anything for not that expensive, because I know these are like big volumes, they're likely to be kind of expensive, and I'm not that rich, let's be real. But I would love to read more of his work. And I don't know why. Like, maybe I'm a masochist or something. I don't bloody know. But I never understood why people get into horror. Because I don't read a lot of horror. I don't watch a lot of horror. The closest I get to consuming a lot of horror media is even though I haven't listened to the latest series, like the last series that they did, I really liked what I listened to of the Magnus Archives, a horror podcast. But for the most part, I don't partake in a lot of horror media unless it's got a comedy aspect to it or a campness aspect to it. So in terms of campness, whether intentional or not, things like Hammer horror or the old Universal, like the Universal pictures of things like Frankenstein, Dracula, the old school cinema villains and monsters is the word I couldn't think of there, That's the kind of horror I like. Or things like Shaun of the Dead or Hot Fuzz, which are like comedy horror kind of stuff. That's what I aim for most of the time. And this is never the sort of place I want to go to, especially because it's body horror. And it's just, what am I doing? Why do I do this to myself? It's such a strange feeling. It's weird though, because I'm not complaining. Everything that he does, everything that I'm feeling is done on purpose. I'm meant to feel like this. The only real complaint I have is that sometimes characters look a bit similar. Like, especially, like, women who fit into, like, the late teen, early 20s sort of age range. They tend to look quite similar. And the sort of pre-adolescent boys tend to look kind of similar. Apart from sometimes like size difference in terms of like sometimes like in terms of weight sort of size, not necessarily height. There's a little bit of that, but I don't think that is as much of an issue if you're not doing what I'm doing. So if you're reading everything at once, like I'm doing currently, where I'm reading a lot at once, it might be a bit more confusing than if you're doing what most people do, which is perhaps spacing things out. I think if you're spacing things out, it won't necessarily be quite as bad. But it's just something to know. And it's not anything that has, you know, harmed my enjoyment of these books. It's just not it. Like, it's not harmed my enjoyment of this book. It's just something that I noticed. Yeah, so I think what I will say about that is don't start with Uzumaki unless you're already mad into reading horror. If you're wanting to branch out a little bit, like I've been doing, don't start here. Start either as I did with Frankenstein, or start with what I think I wish I'd have started with, which is Tomy. Because I just think that's the best place to start. For the rest of March, I'll be reading books exclusively by women, and that is a celebration of Women's History Month. So I'm going to pull a title out of the box. If it's not by a female author, then it'll go back in the box and I'll pull something else out. It'll get read sooner or later. Also, I do have some audiobooks and library books coming up soon as well, so all of that good stuff. Let's pull something out of the box. Helps if I hold it the right way round. Get up in you bitch. Sorry for calling you a bitch. That wasn't very nice. What do we got? We have The Glittering Art of Falling Apart, which I'm almost certain is written by a woman. We'll find out in a moment. I reorganised my shelves and then immediately it's gone to pot. Because I can't stay organised. Yeah, here it is. So, let me read the blurb for you. Cassie has long been fascinated by Beaufort Hall, the house her family once lived in but no longer speak about. When the chance comes to explore the beautiful but crumbling mansion, Cassie jumps at the opportunity, little realising she's about to shine a light on a long-buried family secret. For Eliza, decades before, the heady pull of Soho at its most electric is a difficult thing to ignore, full of glamour, parties and indulgence. With the world at her feet, Eliza finds everything comes at a price. Separated by a generation but linked by a forgotten diary, these two women have more in common than they will ever know. This sounds so much fun. I remember picking this up. I remember this was one of those books I was like, should I, shouldn't I, when I was looking at buying some more books, or when I was in one of my, like, as I am in the minute, I shouldn't be buying more books. I need to be careful about this because my shelf is going to, like, start overflowing. But I thought, no, you know what? I kept going back to it. It was one of those that it's clearly got something that is roping me back in, that's bringing me back. So that will be next week's read. Shall we pull out 2? Do we have time for 2? No, we'll have an audiobook alongside this. I'm not going to try and overexert myself by reading too much at once because my brain don't work like that. So we'll be seeing this next week, and then probably another audiobook, because I have time to listen to audiobooks, so I don't know how to pronounce her surname, apologies, but it's called The Book of Two Ways. I'll put the author's name here. I believe it's Jodi P. Cole, I assume. I don't know if you pronounce the T. Many apologies. But that's what I'm planning for. That might be next week or the week after because it's quite a long audiobook. But it is what it is. I'll probably have some library books on the way as well. Actually, I definitely have one. That'll either be next week or the week after, which I might have picked out because the cover just looked really pretty. But then I picked up and looked at the back and I was like, oh, this actually sounds really interesting as well. So, you know, maybe sometimes you can judge a book by its cover. Should I do that for a video? Judging books by their cover? That would be a really nice little library find type of thing. Like, don't even read the back, judge a book by its cover and just go straight in. I might do that. That sounds really interesting. Let me know if you want to see that below and all that sort of thing. So, I'll see you next week. Thank you very much for coming. I hope you've had a nice day, or you will have a nice day, depending on when you're watching this. Take care of yourselves. Right.